On the feast of the apparition of Our Lady of Lourdes, the Lesson of Bernadette of Lourdes by Sister Mary Eleanor, CSC, published in Certitudes, copyright 1927. We live in a purse-proud age. We talk glibly of democracy, and yet comparatively few of us judge others by the standard of personal worth. The external trappings of the man receive far more consideration than does his character. Because of our tendency to social judgments, I'm certain that if a vote were taken to determine the consensus of opinion concerning the greatest woman of the past century, lowly Bernadette of Lourdes would receive not even a respectable minority. The size of this minority would, however, depend absolutely on the diffusion of knowledge of Bernadette among those who love the Blessed Virgin Mary. Anyone who loves the Queen of Heaven and who knows the story of Bernadette would perforce grant the greatness of this humble peasant girl of Lourdes. The reasons for Bernadette's greatness are many, and one of the most important of them is her profound humility. Humility was a conspicuous virtue of Our Blessed Lady, who so honored this little French girl. On the occasion of the visitation of Elizabeth, the Virgin Mary did not merely compose poetry when she sang in her Magnificat, "My soul doth magnify the Lord, because he hath regarded the humility of his handmaid." She really announced a cause and its effect, which were to be repeated often in ages to come. Every saint is entitled in some measure to say that God has regarded the humility of his servant, and no saint perhaps can say it with better right than this most favored child of our heavenly Queen, Bernadette of Lourdes. Few of us moderns would select a child so poor, so illiterate, so unhealthy as Bernadette to do any task for us, and yet she was chosen by the Queen of angels and saints to accomplish a mission second only to that of the apostles. Lourdes is the living contradiction of infidelity. Lourdes gives daily testimony to the power of God's mother and the faith of God's children. Lourdes is in many ways the most remarkable fact in the world today. The scientific world went on its knees in homage to Madame Curie because of the benefits conferred on mankind by her discovery of radium. Many are grateful to her for the cure of cancer or other diseases through the radium treatments. But what homage is not due to the little peasant girl who at the bidding of Our Lady scratched the earth with her hand to release a stream of water which is to flow always for the instant healing of thousands diseased in body and soul, and for the benediction and conversion of an unbelieving multitude? The achievement of this child in the face of tremendous opposition is something to shake the foundations of incredulity, to awaken the admiration of the mightiest of the mighty, and to startle the ramparts of materialistic reasoning. This achievement is tremendous, and yet it was made humanly possible in consequence of her humble simplicity. This simplicity, in itself of course a result of grace, seems to have been more effective than were the first miracles at Lourdes in defeating those who opposed Bernadette's mission. By her guilelessness and unfaltering adherence to truth, she refuted the arguments of savants who sought to trap her. By her simple unconcern as she walked in the midst of thousands, some of whom doubted her sanity, some of whom worshipped her as one favorite of God, others of whom despised her as an impostor, she proved unmistakably the divinity of her mission. There is no more dramatic event in modern history than the one which occurred on Thursday, February 11th, 1858, an event which was to teach the world the power of the Mother of God. This event occurred near the town of Lourdes, in France, on the bank of the river Gave, and its immediate setting was Massabielle, which in the simple patois of the countryside means old rocks. On that day high heaven looked down on the most glorious scene of many centuries. There were two persons in this scene, and they were surrounded by a wild and solitary setting. A mill stream tumbled and frothed over its stony bed till it lost itself in the more placid river, shortly after it had passed the rocks of Massabielle. Just where these huge rocks reared their sullen heads highest into the air, 3 irregular caverns pierced their structure. The largest cavern was at the base, and the 2 smaller ones were superimposed on this cavern. The 3 caverns were joined by canals. At the base of the larger of the 2 upper caverns, a wild rose trellised itself along the rock. Kneeling on the bank of the churning stream was a little peasant girl of 14 years, clad in a patched black dress with a white capulet or mantle covering her head and falling back over her shoulders. On her little feet she wore the coarse sabots and stockings of the peasants. Between her clasped hands was a rosary, the beads of which were slipped along as she prayed. Her delicate face was transfigured. Her wide brown eyes glowed with unearthly light as they gazed at the other person in the scene. In the larger of the upper caverns of the rock, with her feet just above the trailing rose, stood the most beautiful of women, the Virgin Mary. Ineffable light floated about her, not the glaring light of the sun, but the cool radiance of the morning star. She was of medium height, of human flesh like ours, but flesh lustrous, beautiful beyond dreams. Graceful in immortal youth she stood. On her face could be read the innocence of childhood, the purity of young virginity, the tender seriousness of motherhood, the wisdom of ages, all in sweet harmony. Her robe, long and graceful, was woven of some unimaginable fabric. It fell in folds of light to the small white feet on the dark rock. On each foot was a golden rose, from which streamed a mystic light. A wide blue girdle around her slender waist was knotted loosely in front and fell to the edge of her robe. On her head was a white mantle, which hovered like a moon-kissed cloud over her slim virginal shoulders. In her clasped hands was a milk-white rosary, the beads of which were slipped through her fingers as the little girl before her prayed. She wore no jewels, no diadem, and yet in the blessing of her smile and in the enraptured eyes of the little girl could be read the full measure of this peerless woman's queenliness over heaven and earth. The sum of all earthly beauty stood graciously in that little niche in the rock, and high heaven hovered about the ragged child, into whose eyes the Queen of Heaven was smiling. Why were there in this glorious picture 2 such contrasting figures? We, in our poor, foolish way, would have sought the world over to find a beautiful, cultured woman to represent us on the occasion of Mary's visit to France. We would have furnished a palace for her entertainment and 1,000 ladies in waiting. Why did Our Lady come to this child in this out-of-the-way place? The answer to this question furnishes the reason for the greatness of Bernadette. Our Lady chose Bernadette for the very same reasons, albeit in lesser measures, as those which brought the angel Gabriel to Mary herself, her innocence and her humility. 18 times did Our Lady come from heaven to stand there in that cavern in the rock and to hold communion with the little girl who could not write or read. Every time she came, a larger throng of people was in waiting. They could not see Mary, but they were well content to gaze on the enraptured face of the child who was privileged to converse with her. Monsieur Estrade, who went to Lourdes, as he said, to laugh and enjoy himself thoroughly, expecting to see a kind of farce or some grotesque absurdities, and wondering at the simplicity of so many blockheads, had, after a few minutes' contemplation of the child in ecstasy, the certitude, the irresistible intuition that a mysterious being was there. Thousands of eager eyes watched Bernadette when, during the 9th apparition on February 25th, she opened the earth for the miraculous fountain of Lourdes, an event which has been and still is of such tremendous consequence. The little girl was entrusted at the beginning of this apparition with the 3rd of her secrets. After she had learned this secret there was a brief silence on the part of Our Lady. Then her lovely voice again ravished Bernadette's ears. "Go and drink from the fountain and wash yourself in it, and eat of the herb which is growing at its side." At the word fountain, Bernadette gazed about her in bewilderment. There was no fountain, and there never had been one near the grotto. She got up from her knees and walked toward the river, but she was stopped by a word from Our Lady. "Do not go there," said Mary. "I have not spoken of drinking from the Gave. Go to the fountain, it is here." She pointed toward the parched corner of the grotto, to which on the preceding morning she had made Bernadette ascend on her knees. The little girl climbed again to it on her knees. Then, perhaps at some sign from her queen, she scratched the earth and scooped out a handful. Immediately the hole was filled with water. Bernadette 3 times lifted the muddy water to her lips in the hollow of her hand before she could force herself to swallow it. Finally she did so, then bathed her face in the water. She then ate a blade of grass growing beside the hole. Suddenly the water leaped over the brim of the hole and flowed like a thread of silver toward the curious crowd below. At the same moment Our Lady disappeared. Bernadette turned to face the crowd. There were streaks of mud on her face. Some of the people jeered, some cried pitifully, "Bernadette is no longer herself, the poor child has gone mad." Most of them, however, bowed in admiration to the little girl who passed modestly through the crowd and went home. After the vision and Bernadette's departure, the people examined the ground. It was dry all about, except in the place where Bernadette had dug it with her hand. There the tiny streamlet trickled in increasing volume. Today the output of water from that fountain is 18 gallons a minute. Thus came the miraculous water which has given sight to the blind, hearing to the deaf, health to the sick, hope to the hopeless, courage to the despairing, and faith to the unbelieving. The waters of Lourdes have carried their healing power to the 4 corners of the earth. Little Bernadette drank of them often, but they never brought her physical health. She was chosen for the high favor of suffering, as the Son of Mary singles out his special friends who are brave enough to become martyrs for his sake. Little Bernadette was told by Our Lady that she should receive her happiness only when she should come to heaven. Bernadette understood Our Lady well. Eyes that have looked on Mary can never be satisfied with the joys of earth. A heart that loves Mary is glad to suffer for her Son. On April 4th, 1864, the first of the processions at Lourdes was held, in accordance with Our Lady's command, given through Bernadette to the church officials. About 50,000 persons marched in this procession, people from every walk of life. It was a magnificent demonstration, a triumphal ceremony, which marked the close of innumerable difficulties on the part of Bernadette and of those who believed in her mission. The name of the favored child was acclaimed by the multitudes, and her story was told from pulpits near and far. The Queen of Heaven, however, feared for the humility of her little handmaid, and so Bernadette was not present to witness her dream come true. Instead, she lay on the humble pallet of public charity in the hospital, her frail body racked with pain. The story of Bernadette did not end with the 18th apparition of Our Lady. It is a continued story whose full meaning will never be known in this world. 3 secrets were entrusted to her by Our Lady. They were not revealed in the succeeding years during which she lived her simple and laborious life as the daughter of a peasant. They were not revealed in the years during which she lived as a sister of charity, serving well the poor and sick. They were not revealed in the 30 years in which her body lay incorrupt in its humble tomb. They were not revealed when that body was given again to the veneration of the public. They were not revealed when the Church hailed her blessed. The full measure of Bernadette's greatness may perhaps be hidden in those secrets. She doubtless prefers it so, because she suffered much when forced to receive adulation. It is the way of those who receive gifts from an earthly sovereign to boast of them. Those who receive gifts from God, however, are prone to hide them in the depths of their own humility. When Sister Mary Bernard, as Bernadette was called in religion, was once asked whether she did not sometimes feel the temptation to self-esteem, and having been thus honored by Mary, she answered, "What a strange idea you have of me! As if I did not know that if the Holy Virgin made choice of me, it was because I was the most ignorant of creatures. If she could have discovered another more ignorant, she would have chosen her in my place." End quote. On another occasion she said that Our Lady made use of her just as a woman makes use of a broom. After the woman sweeps, she puts the broom in a corner. So too, said Bernadette, quote, Our Blessed Lady made use of me, and when my work was done, she put me away in a corner. It is the proper place for me. I am happy in it, and there I shall stay. End quote. Bernadette did indeed stay in her corner. Her efforts to avoid those who sought her that they might pay her homage were at times almost laughable. No pompous person ever made more heroic efforts to be in the foreground than this humble sister made to keep herself in the background. She was conspicuous only by her unfailing charity, touching many of the sick unto healing. She who so studiously avoided interviews with persons of wealth or of rank was happy when the sick clamored for her attention. Bernadette's sense of values had been perfected by that loveliest of women who stood on the bleak rock and spoke these heart-stirring words, I am the Immaculate Conception. This, then, is the lesson of Bernadette, the lesson of humility. Humility is the truth that sees things as they are and measures their values correctly. The lesson of clear-sighted humility is needed today more than any other lesson, and it is a lesson that Bernadette is perhaps better qualified than anyone else to teach. Humility is the safeguard of innocence, a quality of soul so much endangered by the false standards of today. It should be the prayer of us who know Bernadette that she may intercede for the sin-darkened world, that her glorified hands, no longer limited by time or space, may scoop up the healing waters which once flowed at her touch, and scatter them in benediction over the nations. Wherever these drops of water fall, there will surely spring up the flowers of humility and purity and faith. And that's the end of the text. Our love and honor to Saint Bernadette through the hands of our Blessed Mother, the beautiful Lady of Lourdes. On my own personal name day, my parents visited Lourdes while my mother was carrying me, and I was only named Lisa because it sounded good with Bernadette. And blessed name day to our spunky granddaughter, Clara Bernadette. Our Lady of Lourdes and Saint Bernadette, pray for us. Blessed be God in his angels and in his saints.
et benedictus, et benedictus fructus ventris, ventris tui, Iesus. Ave Maria.